Hi friends, it's Lauren Taylor. Thanks for joining me back in my craft room today for a fun fandom video. I'm going to be using lots of products from Kindred Stamps like the Welcome to the Jungle paper pad. I'm only going to use my sentiment strip dies. I also have the stencil from the Prehistoric family box, and I'm only going to use the jungle scene die. I was thinking about maybe making this interactive, but I end up not going that route. I also use the Jungle Life stamp set, and then I'm going to remember in about a couple of minutes when I start setting everything aside that I also have this missing link stamp set. I'm trying not to fully show the images as I don't want them to be swiped or stolen, so you can check out my supply list down below in the description for links to these stamp sets if you want to see them over at the Kindred Stamps shop. I'm going to stamp my images out on alcohol marker friendly white cardstock, and I'm using my Sassy Club Onyx Black ink, which is my favorite ink for my Ohuhu Honolulu art alcohol markers. I don't know if that was the correct order of saying those markers, but I prefer the Honolulu B as there is a brush and a nib tip on these markers. So now that my stamping is done, let me get zoomed in here and we will do a little color and chat. It's been a while since I've had a longer coloring video. There are 4 images that are colored pretty much completely differently, so my coloring does take up a little bit of time in this video. If you don't want to see or watch or listen to anything in this section, I do include chapters in my videos, so you should be able to select the next chapter and speed through or completely skip the coloring part of this video. So I am using a fandom set, so I'm not going to use anybody's names, but I'll just say first I'm coloring my gorilla. So I do have pictures of these characters up on my computer screen while I'm coloring in hopes to, follow the original images as best as I can. So for the fur of my gorilla, I'm going to be using warm grays. I started with coloring in her kind of lower half, and now I'm coloring in her head, which is about half of her body in this image. So I'm starting with my darkest color first, and that will be kind of the trend of all my coloring for this video. So the darker color is WG130. It is definitely the darkest of the 3. So when I bring in my midtone, WG090, I do go back heavy-handed in that shadow and really try to blend between these 2 colors as there is kind of a big jump between the 2. I wish I had one more color shade in between to kind of bridge that gap a little better, but I still think it turns out really nice. And then I bring in WG070 for my lightest color, and I completely color in the image. So I always start with my darkest, and then if I have 3, I'll bring in a midtone and then the lightest. But some of my colors, I only do 2. And then when I have a large space, kind of like the top of my gorilla character's head, sometimes I'll bring back in that midtone or the lightest tone, or I'm sorry, the darker tone. And then I'll bring the light back in to really try and blend all of that together. Now for my gorilla's face, ears, hands, feet, stomach, I'm using red grays. So I'm starting with the darker tone RG080, and I'm just outlining the areas where I think would be the darkest parts of all of these areas of her body. And then I'll bring in my midtone RG050, and again I'm going over the darkest areas and bringing that color out more into the white of the paper. And then the lightest color, I'll completely color the image, and the color shade I'm using is RG030. So I will finish coloring her up, and then for all my characters, the tongues are always going to be R12, and the inside of the mouths will always be R8. And then for her cheeks, I'm going to bring in a red color that looks a little bit more purpley because I didn't want them to be too bright pink of cheeks when I used a red gray. So her cheeks are R270. And that will finish off our gorilla. So I'll flip my paper over and we'll move on to our female human character. Her hat, shoes, gloves, and some of her dress are definitely more of like a khaki cream color. So I'm bringing in yellow grays for the hat and the shoes. I'm doing WG080 as the darker tone. And then I'm only going to do 2 tones for the hat. So the lighter one is WG040. Same for the shoes. I will use that same color to be the darker shade for the areas of her dress and her gloves, and then the lighter color will actually be a warm gray, WG 0.5, which is kind of more of a yellowier or browner gray, so I think it matched pretty well with the yellow grays that I have. I also did the kind of lacy part of her dress. Now for her skin in the cartoon movie, she definitely has kind of a pinky skin tone. So I'm going to use R26 as the darkest shade for her face, and also her arms, like in between her dress and her glove. And then my mid-tone is R29. So very similar to how I colored my gorilla, going over the dark areas and bringing, blending it together and into the light color. And then the final color for her skin tone is going to be R18. So I'll completely cover her in. I do find that lighter colors sometimes will spread the ink. Like I think just because there's more alcohol with it, since there's such a light pastel color, it can tend to smear my black ink. So I do my very best to not, color on top of the line. So I delicately go around the eyes, nose, and mouth just to make sure that I don't cause any bleeding. For her hat, there was one part I realized I missed that was a little bit darker than the rest. So for the darker tone, I grabbed WG070, and then the lighter tone was YG080. Now we're moving into her dress, which is yellow. So I'm starting with Y140 and adding in all of the shadow in her dress. My light source is kind of in the middle, so that will be the darker tone. And then the lighter tone, I brought in Y1, and I'm filling in the rest of the dress. I didn't think there was a dark enough contrast between the two, so I'm going to grab one more color and add in a little bit more shadow, which is YR33. I felt like there was a little bit more contrast and like deeper shadow edges to kind of match the rest of my coloring. So I was pretty happy with adding in that extra color into my yellow combination. For her shoes, I'm just going to do one color, WG130, as like a dark kind of black color. And then for her hair, I'm going to bring in my go-to brown color combo, BR1, BR2, and BR3. You don't see a lot of the hair, so I'm going to focus most of the dark colors just under the hat and at the end of the hair, so that way the highlight just kind of goes around like a halo around all of her hair. So can you believe it's 2024? I know we're already like a third of the way through January, but I'm just having a hard time believing that it's January. My daughter's birthday is this month, and I can't believe that I'm about to have a 10-year-old. It's just really making me feel old, I guess you could say, even though I know I'm not old. I feel old. Having a double-digit daughter is definitely going to be a culture shock, I guess you could say. It's just crazy how time has been flying. So to finish off the last little bits of my girl character, I'm coloring in her necktie with RV160, RV200, and then I also added some R21 for her cheeks. I've switched papers now, and I'm going to start coloring in my elephant. And I will say this color combination is probably not my favorite. I definitely think using the colors I chose seemed like it should have colored him in well, but I just couldn't get the blend quite right between the 3 colors that I choose for the elephant. So I I like how he turns out. I just think that I would have preferred something different. I don't know what that color combination would be, so I do need to experiment more. But in case you really like this color combination, I started off with E080 as my darkest color, and I'm bringing in E060 as the lightest. Thinking back, I probably should have just done these two colors, but because such a large space for some of the image, I wanted to bring in a third one, and I ended up settling on YR5 because this character does have like an orangey reddish, well, reddish orange color, but I just couldn't get a really nice blend between my YR5 and the E060. I go back and forth and I try to really blend them together, but I don't know, I just couldn't get the blend how I wanted it. But I thought this was the best color combination, so I'm just going to keep going with it and color in my elephant. So January has a lot of exciting things. I am doing, continuing my design work with Kindred Stamps, Trinity Stamps. I also work with Pretty Pink Posh, and I'm starting with This Calls for Confetti. I also help out the Sassy Club, and of course my favorite is scrapbook.com's creative team, so I am a little busy bee. Oh, and I can't forget Spellbinders as well. I feel so blessed and lucky that I get to, get products early to be able to share inspiration with you. I hope that I can continue that into 2024. As always, you have my YouTube channel. I have Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and my blog. So you can always find everything at my laurentaylormade.cards website. And of course, if you're here on YouTube, you can always find all of my information in the description of my videos. But I'd love to know, I think I really want to focus more and get back into my coloring videos this year. So please let me know in the comments if there's specific stamp sets or brands that you want to see coloring for. I'm going to try to do more fandom coloring because I know that I tend to get a lot of views with my fandom cards. So if there's a specific movie, you can always message me on Instagram if you don't want to actually say the name, because I do my best to not ever say fandom names. I don't want the companies that I love so dearly to ever get in trouble. So I do my best to not ask you to give me names. So if there's something specific and you don't know how to say it, you can always just message me, or you can say the name of the stamp set and the company that creates that stamp set in the comments, and I can look it up. So going back to the coloring of my elephant, the ears, again, I just had a hard time with the color combination, but I used E060, E050, but it wasn't really pink enough, so I did bring in R12 again just to try to pinken up the ears. For the elephant's tusks and little toenails, I guess, I used YG080, YG040, and then the eyes, I just brought in the lightest cool gray and my colorless blender to give it a little bit of dimension, and of course my R8, R12 for the mouth, and R21 for the cheeks. And the tail, I think, is a bit of a dark brown, so I went ahead and colored in the tail with E130. Again, I am not really thrilled with the coloring of my elephant. It does kind of evaporate a little bit, so the ears don't look, I feel like, as weird on the final card, but I still need to figure out this color combination a little better. Moving on to my last character, my male human here, the star of the show. I'm going to be using a more darker tan skin tone. I still think it turned out a little pinkier than what I was going for, but I'm starting with R27 as the darkest tone and R26 as the second mid-tone or second dark tone. I end up using 4 colors for him. Again, I wanted him to look a little bit more tan than my female character, especially as he is, like the king of the jungle. So he definitely has probably a pretty gosh darn good tan. So then my third color, which is more my mid-tone, I'm bringing in R29, and very similar to how I colored everything else in today's video, just doing my best to bring out the shading into the light and just blending it together as best as I can. And then finally, I bring in R18 to fully color in his skin. I do accidentally go over one of his eyes, so my black ink does kind of smudge a teensy tiny bit, which I was a little bit bummed about. But again, with lighter colors, you just have to be careful because there is a little bit more alcohol ink in there compared to color. And, just be aware that you just have to be extra careful around large areas of your stamp like the eyes. So after I'm all done coloring in his skin, I was doing, my best to get a nice blend. I wanted to color his hair in. I'm kind of regretting not just doing the same color combination as my female character, but I wanted them to look a little bit different with the hair color. So I'm starting with E130 as my darker tone, and I'm doing my best to follow the design of his hair. He has kind of like a, I guess, I don't know if it's like a dreadlock look, but I know if you know anything about this movie, the artist who drew or designed the character, this male character in the movie, took a lot of inspiration from surfers and from skateboarders. So I feel like that's kind of the vibe they're going for. So I was trying to color his hair to kind of match that, hopefully, vibe that I hope you're picking up what I'm throwing down when it comes to his hair. The mid-tone, I'm bringing in E120, and his hair is a lot darker than what I was coming out with here with this blend. So this is where I wish I just would have stuck with my traditional brown colors that I like to use for hair. But I did bring in one more light color, E110, and it just was too light brown for me. I feel like his hair is a lot darker in the movie. So I will bring back in my E120 and just kind of darken up some of those highlighted areas, just to, make his hair look a little darker. As always, the mouth is R8, the tongue is R12. I didn't color any cheeks on my male character here, so I don't know, because he was a guy, I guess I just didn't add it. I probably could have, but I didn't. And then I used BR1 and BR2 to color in his loincloth. And then for the vine, I wish I would have waited to color this just because I wasn't sure about my background yet. But I started with G3 and I fully colored in the vine, and then brought G390 in to add some shadow just at like the base of the leaves and where I think shadow would be due to where he's hanging on to the vine with G390, and then again G3 to just kind of blend out that shadow. So only two colors for my vine. So I fussy cut all of them out, added some white highlights to the images, and here you can see how they turned out. I also used a really small hole punch to get in between my male character's arm and the vine, and then fussy cut in there as well. So now let's move on to our background. I'm starting with a piece of blue cardstock. This is very similar to Moonstone from Lawn Fawn. It's already cut down to A2 in size, and I'm putting it on my waffle flower grip mat and my stencil mat, and I have my little ink pad square mat thingy from Waffle Flower. I'm obsessed with this setup. It's so easy to use and easy to clean. I grabbed one of my Trinity blending brushes and I grabbed Distress Oxide in Tumbled Glass, and I stenciled it through the Kindred Stamps Prehistoric family stencil, which to me gives like a cobblestone look, but it also looks like a giraffe. So I wanted a really subtle kind of animal print in my sky. So I think it looks really nice. I know it's really hard to see right now, but you'll see in a little bit how it shows up. I grabbed my pearl color pigments to the blue and I splattered it all over that background. I'm going to use one of my microfiber cloths to pick up the excess water. Again, I'm going for like a tone-on-tone look. And then I grabbed broken china, and I'm adding broken china to the top of my blue background, and I'm only bringing it down about maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and you could see that background is really starting to show up when I do this. But again, I really just wanted a subtle pattern in my sky just to fill in my background. Here you can see that print really well. Again, very cool tone-on-tone look. Next, I'm going to grab one of my pattern papers from the Welcome to the Jungle paper pack. It's this like really bright limey green with a kind of tone-on-tone look of leaves. I'm grabbing a piece of Cilantro cardstock from Fawn that is already cut to 5.5 inches. I think I must have used the other half on a card. So I ran that through my die cut machine with the grass scene craft die from Kindred Stamps. It's just slightly smaller than 5.5, so I'm just trimming to where I need to get to the ends of the cardstock. And I want this to be kind of like a grassy scene. I'm just trying to give more floor dimension, I guess, on my background. So I'm going to use my paper cutter, and I'm going to trim this to be about 1 inch to the top of the grass. And then I am going to grab Lucky Clover Distress Oxide this time, and another blending buddy from Trinity Stamps, and distress the bottom edge of my grass. So the bottom of the grass will be darker than the blades of the grass. I also wanted to bring in a little bit more watercolor. This time I'm bringing in my gem colors and adding water to the green and just splattering that right onto my grassy border. I'll go ahead and use a microfiber cloth to dry my grass as well as pick up the ink on my glass board, and we can get to creating the background. Now I noticed that my blue piece of cardstock was just slightly larger than A2. It was, I think, a little bit bigger than 4.25, so I'm going to trim this to be a little bit smaller than 4.25 just so it fits behind my die cut grassy scene here, my jungle scene. I guess not grass, it's jungle. That way I don't have to worry about it showing out past the edges of my die. I'm gluing my grassy border to the bottom of my stenciled blue sky background. So this would be so cute on its own, but of course we are in the jungle and we need our jungle scene. Now I didn't like how bright, I guess, my die cut background was going to be, so I just grabbed that blending brush that still had excess ink on it and just brought some of that color onto the die cut background, like not quite halfway up, but pretty darn close halfway up, and I just really liked that. I thought it gave more dimension and more color to my scene. I'm grabbing my foam strips from scrapbook.com. These are 1/8 of an inch wide, and I'm going to use this to add foam adhesive to all 4 sides on the back of my die cut background. And then I also added some strips just throughout the trees and vines to give stability, and then attach that to the front of my card panel. So now that I have my scene all ready to go, let's grab my characters, and I'm going to take a little time here to kind of figure out a layout that I like. I want my elephant and gorilla on the right of the card, my female human character on the left, and of course my male character swinging in on the vines. I die cut one of my sentiment strips out of some white cardstock, and I'm going to use green Oasis VersaFine Clair ink to stamp "Have a Wild Birthday" on this white banner. I obviously didn't get my banner perfectly cut, but I wasn't really worried about that because I knew I was going to trim some of this sentiment down. So I'm going to grab my scissors and I'll trim off the banner just to the right of birthday. I'm going to adhere this to tuck behind the edge of my frame, so I don't need it to be super straight, but I did want to make sure I left plenty of room and I didn't cut too close to the Y on birthday. Now for attaching my sentiment and all of my characters on my card front, I'm going to use a mixture of foam adhesive, the same 1/8 of an inch strips that I used to attach the jungle scene border frame die, and liquid adhesive. So anywhere where my sentiment strip is going to attach to the green scene, the jungle die, I'm going to use liquid adhesive. And anywhere where there's space where the green cardstock isn't and where it will touch the blue background, I'm using foam adhesive. I hope that makes sense. So here you can see where I've added foam adhesive and it's going to attach to the blue cardstock, and then I added liquid adhesive on the back of my banner. Forgive my hoodie head, I was so cold when I was making this video. My heater just was not heating me up. So there's liquid adhesive anywhere where my image or my sentiment is attaching to the green die cut, and then I added foam adhesive to add stability to where my images would be over the blue cardstock. So I repeated that for all my images. I did forget a little bit of foam adhesive on my cute little elephant's trunk, so you'll see how I do that in just a minute. I'm making sure to tuck in the top of my vine into my background so it looks like my guy is, swinging in and wishing you a happy wild birthday. I have my card base. I'm just grabbing my bone folder to make sure there's a nice crease, and then I'll grab my Scotch adhesive, which is like a super duper sturdy adhesive, and I'm going to add that to the back of my card front, and then I will attach it to my card base. I'm making sure to line it up with the score line of my card, so that way in case it was like, slightly smaller or tilted on my card base, I could just use some large scissors to trim off any excess of the card. But I did a pretty good job. For some final touches, I grabbed my gloss pops of color in key lime and I added a bunch of pops. I didn't go too far down in the trees. I kept it where it kind of matched that key lime color of the pops to that really bright green background. And then I prefer my pops of color dots to have a more enamel dot look. So I tap on the inside of the card to dome them out so they look more like an enamel dot than a Hershey Kiss. Here is a close-up look at my Fandom jungle scene birthday card. I hope you had fun coloring with me, and my little check-in for January. It's a busy month. I also have my crop this month with some local crafty friends, so I'm looking forward to that. I'll give you a recap of how that goes later on in the month. But thanks for watching. Again, leave me a comment for future stamp sets that you want to see me color. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!